China is developing a powerful system of social control known as a comprehensive credit score system. In this video, let's look at what this is all about. Should it be a primary concern to people living in China? Would other countries follow suit if this turns out to be efficient? But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell button so you won't miss any of our videos. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, this system, described in their October 5, 2015 report, is designed to monitor and rate everyone in China, assigning scores between 350 and 950. This system would penalize individuals for various behaviors, from minor infractions like jaywalking to more severe issues like criticizing the government. Even more concerning is that people could be held accountable for the actions of their friends and family. The ACLU is an American non-profit organization that advocates for free speech, privacy, and criminal justice reform. The article's author openly cited other online sources and didn't claim to be an expert on China. Just 3 days later, the author updated the article to soften its tone and clarify that he was mainly warning about potential abuses in America. Despite this, the article had a significant impact. The endorsement from a high-profile, respected institution like the ACLU caught the attention of other organizations. 2 days after the original ACLU article was published, and a day before it was updated, Computer World republished it, describing the Chinese system as Orwellian. Popular Science noted that although the system wasn't explicitly oppressive yet, it had all the elements to become so quickly. In less than a week, the social credit system entered English-language news. There was a lot of evidence supporting it, with many sources saying the same alarming things. Even though they all talked about the same ACLU report, written by someone who was not an expert on China and based on earlier guesses, the story caught on fast. There wasn't a deliberate plan to make China look bad or any ill intent from the people writing the stories. It was more about the competition among news outlets, which made the story seem more significant than it was. America's typical distrust of China and technology made the story even more attention-grabbing. The social credit system has caught on, getting attention from prominent newspapers like the Financial Times and Fortune. Even former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence talked about it at the White House, calling it an Orwellian system that controls almost everything about people's lives. But if you ask someone who's lived in China about it, they'll probably need clarification. This isn't because of censorship or government stories. While China does control what people see and hear, for the social credit system to work like people say, they would have to know about it. Instead of getting mad or disagreeing, people who know China well just don't get it. Even though the Chinese government does some bad stuff, the scary credit system that everyone talks about isn't real. The truth is much simpler. In June 2014, China's State Council released the planning outline for establishing a social credit system. However, this document is relatively dry and deliberately unclear. It's packed with complicated terms like promote the improvement of legal person governance, making it tough to grasp. Just a month earlier, in May 2014, the Chinese government launched a war on terror in Xinjiang, targeting violent extremism. It led to a harsh crackdown on Uyghurs and other minority groups, involving large-scale detentions, extensive surveillance, and ongoing violence. During this period, global suspicion of the Chinese government was already growing. The introduction of the ambiguous idea of social credit only fueled these concerns. It seemed like a tool for imposing widespread surveillance and control. Interestingly, there's some truth to these suspicions. China has indeed created a repressive police state in Xinjiang over the years, using tactics like DNA collection, monitoring people's phone usage, and maintaining constant security checkpoints. So, when we hear about social credit, it's natural to wonder what else it might involve. And if there's nothing questionable about it, why present the plan in such vague terms? Many ordinary people might not understand that the Chinese Communist Party often uses complicated language rooted in Leninist ideology. And there's a reason for this. For an autocrat, having total, unchecked authority has apparent advantages. But it's important to realize the downside. With complete authority comes complete responsibility. There's no one else to blame if things go wrong. To avoid criticism, they usually delegate more power than you might think. Beijing always has the ultimate authority, But imagine it as an architect. It designs the national plan, first as a policy document and later as an outline. However, it delegates the actual execution to lower levels of government, its implementers. When the outcome doesn't match the initial plan, the central government can distance itself by referring to its vague, unremarkable sketches. However, the central government also has its objectives to convey to the lower levels of government. So, while these policy documents may seem tedious, they contain essential information. You just need to understand the party language. So, what did it mean by social credit? Jeremy Dom, a senior fellow at Yale Law School Paul Tsai China Center, who is knowledgeable about party language, explains that social credit isn't merely a single policy. Instead, it encompasses a range of initiatives and actions. The first focus or initiative of social credit was on finance. Before the one-child policy took effect in 1980, many individuals were in their peak working years during China's economic boom from the 1980s to the early 2000s. This large workforce helped keep labor costs at a minimum, which attracted foreign companies to reinvest their earnings in the country. However, as these workers began to retire, labor costs increased, resulting in decreased profits and investment. To maintain economic growth, China needed to boost spending. At that time, roughly only 1/5 of the population had a credit history. They couldn't get loans because they lacked access to banks or credit cards. However, many Chinese people were frequently using apps like WeChat and Alipay. So the idea emerged of using data from these apps to develop various types of credit ratings. 8 private companies, including the well-known Sesame Credit, were selected to experiment with this, offering users the choice of 3-digit scores. The second and broader aspect of social credit was about trust. Interestingly, while outsiders see China as tightly controlled and closely monitored, many within China view their country as lawless, unregulated, and lacking accountability. For instance, in 2008, a company got caught using harmful chemicals in its milk and baby formula, resulting in thousands of children falling ill. It's no wonder some parents still don't trust Chinese milk today. Meanwhile, once accepted as a necessary downside to rapid economic growth, corruption had reached a breaking point. Not only was the Communist Party losing control over its members, but the public was also becoming more aware. Stories of local officials driving luxury cars despite their modest salaries were gaining significant attention. To the party, all these issues were linked. The contaminated milk and the corruption all signaled a moral crisis. The solution proposed was to establish what they vaguely called a reputation society. It was similar to the architect giving the engineer a vague problem and saying, "Now, find a solution." The outcomes were as unpredictable and disorderly as you might expect. As a local bureaucrat, how were you supposed to interpret such vague instructions? Nobody knew, and that was the whole point. Numerous cities across China rushed to implement their own versions of social credit reputation systems, each with its own rules and incentives. One city even proposed deducting points for every 5 cigarettes smoked and awarding points for every 15,000 steps taken. No explanation was given for how these numbers were determined or how they could be enforced, but it didn't matter. The public backlash was so intense that the proposal was quickly abandoned. In another strange twist, a different city initially planned to penalize drunk driving and reward volunteer work, but later made the system optional. Yet another town attempted to assign every citizen a grade from A to D until someone compared it to the Japanese occupation of China, leading to its quiet disappearance. It was all rather peculiar and impractical. Naturally, the central government was not pleased. The actual execution did not match the original plan. Alternatively, perhaps Beijing underestimated the public's reaction and saw an opportunity to protect the country from these troublesome engineers. The People's Bank of China refused to renew the licenses of all 8 companies involved in the financial pilot project. Furthermore, Beijing criticized several local governments for their excessive enthusiasm, instructing them to penalize only illegal actions. The third and final aspect of social credit involves blacklists. Previously, each government department kept separate records, meaning someone could break the rules of one department without another department knowing. Now, they're supposed to share this data with the government and the public. This means you can search for a company's name and decide if it's trustworthy. Companies that are generally reliable are placed on red lists, while repeat offenders are put on blacklists. Most of these blacklisted entities are companies, although their owners and managers can also be implicated. As a rough estimate, somewhere between about 1 and 2% of companies and 0.15 to 0.3% of individuals are blacklisted each year. In the harshest situations, wrongdoers might face bans on air or train travel, or on enrolling their children in private schools. However, these limitations are reserved for a particular kind of offense, those who fail to comply with court-ordered damages despite having the means to pay. Once they fulfill their court obligations, their names are removed from the blacklist. By 2018, more than 12 million of these judgment defaulters had felt the impact. Some cities even go as far as publicly showcasing their names in movie theaters. Social credit was challenging to understand. It was made to try new things and give the government a way out if things went wrong. So it's no surprise the media missed the details. China's surveillance isn't new. They've been tracking people for a while now. It's more than laziness from journalists that made them miss the mark. China also feeds into people's fears about its power. In democracies, politics can get in the way of solving problems. This can make people think that being in charge would be easier. But in reality, China's government is just as complicated. By giving power to local governments and private companies, China hoped to get things done faster. But sometimes, they overpromised what they could do. Being skeptical about China's claims about big data and machine learning is essential. So whether China seems like a superpower or a dystopia, it's crucial to look at the facts, not just the stories. If you want more interesting videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification button to stay updated on the latest.